me. I'm in the zone now. All right. So yeah, the first time going through this, very confusing. Don't know a lot about this technical finance, capital, finance, industry, commercial, wages, production, surplus value, human surplus value versus machine surplus value, the duality of money, credit money versus wages and purchasing power. Yeah, it's quite obscure. But then the second time reading through it, so it kind of slowed down. There are parts that were really amazing. I felt like parts where I was like, oh my God, I kind of understand capitalism a little more, as much as it's something that can be understood. But yeah, there are definitely parts that gave me some flashes of insight that I appreciated. I don't know. I'm wondering, once again, I'll have to ask you, not for your donation, but for how it was the experience of reading this. But I think, okay, there's a lot of the thing about, I think Deleuze in general, but I think especially around the time of, the collaboration with Guattari is they're not simply just trying to kind of give you some kind of imminent, like, propositional logic of, like, this statement, modus ponens, it's nothing like that. Obviously, that's not, according to Deleuze, that's not even philosophy. That's logic, which is something different. It uses functions and not concepts. But okay, yeah, philosophy though, very different. They're trying to give you something of an affect that kind of goes along with the concepts, and I think that's a big part of it, especially this whole kind of schizophrenia as a process, accelerate the process thing going. What is the affect like? Which is something that most philosophers will not want to. Well, don't even know how to describe it. That's something that artists kind of deal with. But anyways, that's what I'm curious about.
I'll answer your question. Hi. So yeah, as we all know, we read today sections 8 and 9, The Urstaat and the Civilized Capitalist Machine. This was really weird for me to read. I mean, on one hand, it was pretty direct. I'll just say what it was like, and then I'll give why. Just on one hand, it was pretty direct. It was just like, okay, there's this model of the state. It functions thusly in its conceptual form. It approaches organizations non-immanent to blah, blah, blah. Okay, the concretization, decoding, and spiritualization, okay, we got through it. And then we get into the, like you said, the mechanics of the civilized capitalist machine, like the title of the chapter, or the section, and the structure of the section wasn't too daunting or boring. I mean, it starts pretty like, okay, well, how is capitalism born, given that the functional or practical or realistic preconditions have been there in other circumstances without it emerging? Why did it emerge there and then? What is so whoa? It's kind of like that's the hook of the section. Oh my God. And I thought they've got a good, all right, you're keeping my mind somewhere, you're keeping me interested, you're asking questions I like to ask, they're doing good stuff, right? So points for that. But yeah, there were, a lot of sections where it was like, or not a lot of sections, but there was a good number of pages or points in the text where it was just kind of expanding on I don't know, I'm not going to explain Marx. I don't explain Marx. I don't even have an explanation for anybody, but I did read Capital. My point is, I've read, so the reason that it's so weird is that the first section, the Urstaat, was weird to me because they're using terminology in a way that is like very close to sort of a contemporary Lacanian tradition, talking about the establishment of the state, inventing these new operations, and the model or ideal state being synonymous with the Asiatic mode of production that Marx, is talking about. Zizek talks about this, but it's to really dissimilar from that analysis in a lot of weird ways. Then the capitalist analysis, that whole thing, they're for a while it was like, okay, sure, these guys are kind of hardline Marxist, and they're trying to kind of push this, or they're trying to push the Marxian structure past where it's gone before this text, right? Okay, sure. But then they started analyzing some situations, saying like, okay, well, what would our kind of Marxist, our interpretation of Marx, like how would that describe these mechanisms? How would our reading come to describe these aspects of the political economy, right? And how could we explain these mechanisms like Marx did in our own words? Let's do it, and they seem to come to these conclusions, these answers that were different. I'll say that people acted kind of different out here, like up in the 230s, 240s of this book. We're getting this pretty late game stuff. They're starting to kind of really show their hand here. And I mean, my whole, like, a lot of my questions just came from like points of clarification on certain terms and what they're seeking and what we're preferring. And the only points where I can like explain Marx is where, because I think that Deleuze and Guattari do a great job of explaining Marx. I think that their Marxism is good. I'm not saying blanket Marxism is good. I'm saying their Marxism is a good, like, it's good. They have a good they're thorough. They're good. They're smart. But the only places where I would explain Marx, I guess, and I know you're just said that tongue in cheek, but I'm just using it as a backboard to. The only place where I would is in like alternative readings of Marx that I have, perhaps of potentially small or potentially relatively important or impactful distinctions, and clarifications on points, things like that. But so that was my experience reading the text, and I am willing to. Yeah, I agree, Joey. Well, I mean, the parts of the capitalist machine section that confused me were like parts of their interpretations. Like parts of their interpretations are what confused me, but the functional, like, descriptive analysis, that seemed pretty direct to me. What do you guys think? Because to me, in the civilized capitalist machine, their descriptive analysis of the political economy seemed pretty, by the beats. It was pretty good. I mean, it's pretty strong and solid and consistent and not too weird or disjointed or anything. It was just at certain points their interpretations that I caught hiccups. I was like, whoa, this is kind of weird, whatever. But I don't know, I'm talking too long. So what do you guys think?
I was gonna add, I want to say by and large, they do follow a fairly orthodox Marxist interpretation, but there were a couple points that I felt that departed from that, and then didn't really like back it up with argumentation. I'm thinking like the beginning of our reading. I'm not sure how this point particularly how much it departs from orthodox Marxism, but the very beginning of the Urstaat, they make the claim the state was not formed in progressive stages. It appears fully armed, right? As if, we go from not having any state to having a fully formed state. And this is like something they just claim, and then they don't really like back it up, and it flies in the face of most of our intuitions about this about a formation of a state historically. And it reminded me of how people used to, I haven't followed it recently, but how people used to use the example of the eye and the evolution of the eye as supposed to be like evidence in favor of intelligent design, because a half-developed eye is no good, right? Until again, like actually a half-developed eye can perform a function, right? So I mean, the argument was that the eye didn't develop in progressive stages; it just popped into existence. But I think that's a highly contestable argument. At least with the state, I want to say most of us still tend to think of the state as developing through history in progressive stages and not arriving on the scene fully developed. And so they just kind of throw that claim and then move on. And I was like, can we justify that somewhat or back it up? I don't think much of the rest of the argument hinges on that. But I thought that was curious that they just threw that in there at the beginning of that section and then moved on. I think most of the rest of the section I found plausible, things I could largely agree with. And then later on, I think it was yes, I'm looking at page 225. I'm not sure if that's exactly where it is, but they're discussing Marx's Capital and how Marx kind of draws a distinction between two sides of the commodity. He's always drawing these kind of bipolarities intrinsic to what people generally naively take to be just a simple unity, right? And the way they develop it is it seems to say as if Marx held these things to be incommensurable but mutually informing, and they seem to be advancing an argument that on the one side the money received to the worker that he's going to then spend on use values, as opposed to the account crediting that the business counts for itself and its relations towards banks and bank credits. These two different forms of money being incommensurable to each other. I want to say in orthodox Marxism, yes, they're incommensurable, but they're still intrinsically related. And Deleuze and Guattari kind of advance an argument that they're not actually, that they're coupled after the fact, but they're really fundamentally independent forces. And that's the second point where I felt like they depart from like orthodox Marxism and don't really do much in the way of like justifying that departure.
So Chase can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that thing about the sudden emergence of the state, I mean, they may be drawing that from Nietzsche in the second essay of the genealogy. Let's see. Let me read. This is from section 16 in the second essay. At this point, I can no longer avoid giving a first preliminary expression to my own theory on the origin of bad conscience. It is not easy to get a hearing for this hypothesis. I look on bad conscience as a serious illness to which man was forced to succumb by the pressure of the most fundamental of all changes which he experienced, that change whereby he finally found himself imprisoned within the confines of society and peace. It must have been no different for these semi-animals happily adapted to the wilderness, war, the wandering life, and adventure than it was for sea animals when they were forced to either become land animals or perish. At one go, all instincts were devalued and suspended. Now they had to walk on their feet and carry themselves where they had been carried by water up until then. A terrible heaviness bore down on them. They felt they were clumsy at performing the simplest tasks. They did not have their familiar guide anymore for this new unknown world, these regulating impulses that unconsciously led them to safety. The poor things were reduced to relying on thinking, inference, calculation, and the connecting of cause with effect. That is, to relying on their consciousness, that most impoverished and error-prone organ. I don't think there's ever been such a feeling of misery on earth, such a leaden discomfort. And meanwhile, all the old instincts had not suddenly ceased to make their demand. And he goes on to say that this had to happen suddenly because because if there had been a gradual change, then there would have been a gradual adaptation. But for this sort of sudden shift in consciousness, there had to be a sudden break with what they were used to. And so the way I understand Nietzsche, this is both from the genealogy and from Zarathustra and some other places, is he imagines, because this is coming, I think, from Deleuze and Guattari in 3.6, The Barbarian Despotic Machine. He describes it this way too, as this kind of sudden break. And so the way I think Nietzsche seems to imagine this speculative history is you had these tribal communities, and tribes were primarily all extended familial groups. And so you had these tribal organizations, these tribal societies that were relatively small. And then you had these sudden, the blonde beast or whatever, these conquerors, what does he call them? The artists of violence that kind of, and maybe he's thinking of like Genghis Khan and some of these other leaders, but they just kind of just are rampaging around the nation, subjecting these tribal communities to a foreign law. And so that's at least that's my reading of what Nietzsche has in mind. And so the state, because he's got all this stuff before this about familial organization versus this, what's the other one? Starts with an A. Alliance. So, familial versus alliance. And so you've got these familial organizations that are suddenly subjected, they're under this subjection of a foreign influence. And you have these foreign traditions, foreign moral codes, foreign ways of life. I mean, relatively foreign, if they're in the same general area. But that was what they seem to be calling the initiation of the state, is when you have these civic organizations that are no longer primarily tribal and familial, but you're this power, the external power is forcing and jamming these familial communities and forcing them into a single state under a single form of power. And so then, the way I'm reading this section in the second essay of the genealogy is that it required that kind of sudden subjection to create this internal effect where all the aggressive instincts of these people are suddenly prevented from external expression. And so they, in their sort of prior tribal state, these things had grown in this sort of organic way, and their emotional lives, their internal lives, and all of this kind of stuff were consistent with the traditions of the tribe, because that's how they developed. The traditions of the tribe emerged, through this sort of evolutionary gradual process, biological and social evolution. But then when this external, you see this in what's the book by Freud, Civilization and Its Discontents. It's a similar kind of story. And so when these people are suddenly forced to live under foreign traditions, foreign codes of morality, foreign laws, in fact, laws as such, rather than merely sort of traditional tribal norms, then they're no longer able to express these, their feelings, their emotions, their implicit biological values anymore. And so all that externalization is now forced inward, and that becomes the bad conscience, because now they have to feel bad about, who I am. Well, I have these desires and I have these feelings that I feel like I should be able to express, but now I'm no longer able to express them. And so now I feel, and over time I'm made to feel guilty and feel bad for wanting to express these things. And, Nietzsche's argument is that in order for that process to have happened, it had to happen very rapidly. that you wouldn't have had that because like otherwise it would have been again a normal process of social evolution within a particular physical environment. It would have been gradual, but this sudden break is what was required in order to create this internalization of the instincts, the bad conscience, and all of that. And I think that's in chapter 3 or section 3.4, they reiterate that story to some degree. And so it's I see them as retelling that story that Nietzsche developed and then elaborating it within their own vocabulary, and they extend it beyond what Nietzsche proposed. But that's and I think that's what they're calling the state. Again, the state is when you have this because they call it, what is it, the barbarian despotic machine. It's when you have this, he says this craftsman of violence, that's Nietzsche's term, this artist of violence that comes in and forces this new civic organization, this new kind of civic organization that is no longer just a tribal familial organization, but it's a heterogeneous organization where people are forced to live according to laws imposed by a despot. So I think at least that's the root of the impetus for their claim.
Yeah. Actually, I had a few things to say. Like, Chase, you used the word affect, and yeah, like I don't know if some of what I'm saying is going to totally be like in line with their arguments, but just definitely like with the themes of the book, it seems to me like a lot of the project has to do with like the loosening of the bolts of traditional psychoanalysis and Marxian analysis. And I'm kind of pulling from the foreword by Foucault at the beginning, where you're saying like those were the prerequisites, along with like Reich and others. And like, so when they, earlier in the book, they were criticizing Freud's the Oedipal complex, and they listed the paralogisms. And the reason I think that also is because, like, I mean, really, from what I understand from the idea of like schizophrenia, is just like this I don't want to say dissociation, but this breaking, right, where it's all the pieces are still there, but they're not functioning totally as a whole. That may not even be the right way, but like maybe they focus more as the parts of the whole more so than the whole itself. And so when I'm thinking of like psychoanalysis, it's like breaking the whole of how we understand it, perhaps, to maybe like see if there's other ways it could be put back together, or if maybe there's pieces that we missed out in the first place. Same with Marx, right? Maybe that's like why some of what they were saying, or like when Eric was bringing up, they weren't sticking to the traditional Marxist ideas. Maybe they were just doing the same thing, kind of just breaking it in this process of like schizophrenia to just for the sake of breaking it, right? Another thing is like I want to pull back to the idea, or like they keep bringing up flows, and sometimes to a point where it's like almost annoying. Honestly, like they'll say these flows, and like I feel like it would have almost been easier, but part of me wants to think that that's intentional, just to show like in a Spinozian kind of way that like everything is built by the same stuff of the flows in the machines, right? Whether we're talking about capitalism, whether we're talking about the development of history, whether we're talking about, or the development of how we understand history, at least, whether we're talking about psychoanalysis, all these things, yada, 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 it's all built out of flows and machines. Even at the beginning of the book, they say, it's everywhere. Everything is a machine. and it's all constituted by flows attracting to each other. And that's another thing, right? Like when they're talking about like molecular and molar, that's something I will like want to throw to, maybe to clear up what I meant by like loosening the bolts, right? We have these built machines, like the development of a state or the development of an ego, that have just been kind of concretized, as they put in the Urstaat, right? Like they're abstract, but over time they become concrete, at least how we view them. So when we think of like a subject being the ego, or we think of like the object being the state or the world as it is reified by the capitalist machine, we start taking it as a given. And it seems like to me, it seems like the project is taking these concepts and breaking them for the sake of breaking them, like as like almost an opposition to production for the sake of production. They're using that logic, but in the opposite direction. Another thing I wanted to add with like that was really interesting what Nevitt was saying with Nietzsche, and like the way I took it was that they were talking about like Engels. I haven't read the actual text. It's The Birth of the State. I recently got a copy of it, but like it's just coincidence that like I got that right when we were reading that, because I think, you know, he talks about this development of, he even uses the same terms of like savage, barbarian to civilized society, and like the main distinctions of, or the main things that separate them as far as like the modes of production. And last, I want to say also from Foucault's preface is when he's talking about like seeing it as a book of ethics. So this is kind of a huge shot in the dark, but as far as like, you know, a lot of what they're saying, I agree with this. I think it was Eric that said like, a lot of the times it seems like they're not like, they don't always defend what they say. And then they just throw in stuff that's really obscure that like nobody would know about, and perhaps like doesn't even make sense unless you just figure out a way for it to make sense, which I definitely believe is possible. I think if you try hard enough, anything can make sense, but that doesn't mean it's applicable. So, right. But as far as like the ethics of being able to like see how far you can break something down, like as something is given, because a big thing for me that stood out in the Urstaat was this idea of something abstract being taken as concrete, or like, I guess in the Marxian sense, being a reification, and how that's kind of just given as given, right? Whereas it seems like a big part of this project is, again, as they say, the body without organs, or I think it's the body without organs, likes to, you know, mess up the system, take all the codes and like reorganize them consistently. Like that is the process of the body without organs, is like as soon as something starts consolidating a little too distinctly, it's just like, nope, you can't have that. Like just, you know, reshuffle the cards. Yeah, I think the biggest thing to take out of that is the dissolution of the ego and the state, and the comparison of that. I think that's something I'm really getting right now. But yeah, I'd like to hear what other people have to say about that too.
Okay, well that actually leads me into a question I have, because I have some later, like my real, like when I say question, I mean I can mean either a question or like a moment of kind of doubt or skepticism about how they're employing a term maybe. And I have an actual question at the beginning of the Urstaat, and then my later questions, which are really just me being like nitpicky about terminology, those come much later. And those, now that you've introduced this new possibility that the mixing up of the cards, right, the reshuffling of the order of the formation of the flows at hand, you know, is in a sense, you know, applicable to this schizophrenization or whatever, right? I that complicates the picture. And so I don't know if my later question concerns, I don't know if those will hold as much, but in order to get to them, I'll say this. So we're talking about this, just even, okay, whether or not that's, agreeable to the senses of all involved here today, your reading of the schizophrenization process, the process of that schizoanalysis or whatever, I just want to mount this kind of question to that and to whatever other interpretation one could have of this process that's underway in their analysis. So question to you and to anybody that has any sort of answer to this. And it's back at the Urstaat. It's in the beginning. It's on, in fact, page 218. This is where my first real question came up. It was, they're talking about the Urstaat, the model ideal state, the horizon, the Asiatic mode of production. And there are some real weird things going on there where they call the Urstaat the model, the horizon, the Asiatic mode of production, which I think, there's sort of a really complex mode of interpretation for the Asiatic mode, but I think they're going for a more simple, more direct, like it's the thing outside, it's the beyond, it's not too complex of a comparison, I think. The Urstaat, the sublime ideal model, the Asiatic mode, the thing that doesn't fit in the other modes of production. It's the outside, it's the limit, it's the horizon, it's the over there, it's the other, it's the, and that, if that's the comparison, I get. There's other interpretations of the Asiatic mode I've heard, but I'll shelve that. But here's the thing, right? And so we have this, like you said, in the disillusion of the ego, the disillusion of this sort of model of the state and so on, through this shuffling of the cards, which I find plausible. I find that reasonable. Even if, this is a tentative hypothetical for what they could be proposing here. We don't even know for certain, I guess, because we're not Deleuze experts or whatever, but just tentatively, I agree. Like that sounds reasonable, right? But then I have this question, and it's, on 218, they talk about the state declines as private property ascends, but somehow the state is empowered with the rise of capital. How could this be? When the state seems to decline in order for private property to take over, why is it that the state doesn't seem to get any weaker? What the fuck? Well, okay, they answer, the state is inventing new and specific codes. Okay, so these new and specific codes, the management of private property, commodities, classes, opposition, blah, 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 right? Private property, wealth, commodities, and classes. These new and specific codes. So the state, in the imperial visions of origins, is the beginning, but only as an abstraction. So now we're getting to Nevid, how you were talking about this sudden, and like Joey put in the chat, like lightning. This is this wild appearance of this state thing. Well, it seems like this state as the origin or as the beginning. I think that, I don't know if it introduces classes, but I know that the notion of classes, but this is answering a question in the chat. I think they say that the notion of classes is a part of this apparatus of codes that they're using to deal with these contemporary problems. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe they don't produce the phenomenon of separate classes in society. That's not the case. But the deployment of terms like class and class struggle and so on, maybe that's just a part of kind of the formalizing, the dealing with, the swallowing of the rough edges of the capitalist mode, when it's trying to pass through the esophagus that is adapted to the prior mode, right? So anyway, so the state is the beginning, but only, here's the thing, here's the weird thing. And in fact, I think it might be on two, is it on, yes, actually it's on two, on the paragraph that starts on 218, the bottom paragraph of 218, that leaks over to 219. They make this claim. They're talking about primitive communism, ancient city-states, feudalism, capitalism, socialism. They're talking about Marx's different stages. So it's not about formation among others, nor is it the transition from one formation to the other, blah, blah, blah. Now they say, okay, in this sense, the despotic state is indeed I'm skipping ahead to about the middle point of that paragraph. They say, in this sense, the despotic state is indeed the origin, but the origin as an abstraction that must include its differences with respect to the concrete beginning, right? So here's my thing. They're saying the state, when looked at from this imperial view, the state is the beginning, but it's the beginning as an abstraction. Let's qualify this. Let's be careful what we mean here. Let's be careful how we word this, because they want to be very clear. It's the beginning, but as an abstraction. And we have to distinguish this from its concrete origins or whatever, right? So the way they word this is, yes. And further down, they say, Jean-Pierre Vernant shows in this way that the imperial myths are not able to conceive a law of organization that is, and here's the quote, immanent in the universe. They need to posit and internalize this difference between the origin and the beginning. So the concrete and the abstract, right? Well, here's my question. It seems to be kind of the problem at hand when we're talking about the dissolution of the ego or the dissolution of the state. Is this organization that isn't immanent to reality, this abstraction? You know, my question is, do we prefer things that are immanent to the universe immanent to reality? Are we aiming at something immanence in the universe? Are we trying to put things or phrase things or analyze things in a sense that is immanent to the universe, or to deploy or produce or conceptualize an organization that is immanent to the universe? Is that the goal? Is the goal of the analysis to reach immanence, basically, in that sense? That's what I'm saying. What do we owe? I don't know. Like, what do we owe to immanence? Who cares about immanence? I'm not immanent. You know, I don't imminently do anything. I'm over here. I'm way over here, like behind me, like 10 feet. You guys will never see where I am. I'm never immanent. I'm always latent, I feel, maybe. But what do you guys think? I gotta let my cat out of my room, but go ahead.
Wait, I didn't know Hunter had a cat.
Like that, I mean, I'm hearing like that Zizekian idea where he's just like, people talk about nature, but like, why? Like, why do I want to be one with nature? Like, and yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, I feel like Deleuze and Guattari might have different answers, but yeah, I think even for myself, like, I am libidinally invested in the word imminent. When I hear that word, I'm like, yeah. And so I don't know what to say, like, but I mean the word imminent, to me, I think of like the difference between transcendent. I feel like it kind of ties to me like from this Nietzschean point of view, and so I'm like on that bandwagon. But I think that same question applies of, or like, to me, it leads to the question of what is the value of deterritorialization versus territorialization. And I wonder if Deleuze and Guattari do back this idea that should we be looking for immanence, or is that just one direction things go, or one thing to consider?
Wait, can you repeat that question you just asked?
Me?
Yeah.
I think is it like, do Deleuze and Guattari want us to pursue what is immanent to the universe, or are they just kind of pointing it out as an option or a consideration?
Oh, yeah. Oh, geez. Okay. So it's the imminence thing. Okay. So I think in this case where they're talking about the Urstaat and capitalism also as something that becomes imminent, that there's no kind of normative criteria going along with that. They're more just kind of giving a description, like a neutral description, I think, to a certain sense. Although so there is a level of Deleuze and Guattari where immanence is definitely something good, and it's a part of philosophy in the sense that, okay, so the way that immanence is described in what is philosophy is that is this kind of, it's an image of thought or a presupposition of what it means to think, what it means for there to be anything. So philosophy has to think, but it has to think in relation to some kind of non-philosophy, something that is not itself. And that's this plane of immanence that they talk about. And it has to develop some kind of consistency with that. But it's something that's kind of presupposed, and it's not necessarily the same thing as developing your concept. But anyways, so there's an idea of immanence where that is definitely kind of how we kind of, I don't know, kind of lock into just how the world works, because the world is immanent and there's transcendent effects. But I think it's kind of like, so immanence and immanence, that's going to be a code, that's a signal that there's something Spinoza's going on, because so I think probably Deleuze wrote this mainly in What is Philosophy, but he says that okay, philosophy is always this kind of relation with the plane of immanence. It's constantly fucking up whatever, and thinking transcendence, thinking immanence is immanent to something transcendent. But how do we actually do it? Is it even possible to really like reach this plane of immanence? So they say that in the same way that Jesus showed that through his incarnation, showed that divinity was possible, that's also the same way that Spinoza shows that thinking immanence is possible. And that's why Spinoza is the Christ of philosophers. So he's actually thinking of it like basically Spinoza is Jesus. He showed through his thinking, like he divinely like emanated down and thought with the ethics immanence right there, and that shows that it's possible, which I think that is quite a strong claim. But Spinoza was Jewish, but Deleuze and Guattari were not.
Oh, I thought you said well, you're talking about Jesus.
Oh, Jesus, yeah. That's yeah. Was Jesus Jewish? Yeah, I think so. Maybe, I don't know. Okay, but anyways, so Spinoza, what's his thing with immanence? Okay, yes, Jesus is Jewish. Okay, I'm losing my train of thought here. Where was I going with that? Spinoza. Okay, immanence. All right. You got causes going with Spinoza, and that's how you get there. Think about what is this plane on which everything kind of connects on this consistency, but it's never really fully kind of articulated because it can't be necessarily. That would be to kind of segment it and slow it down, where instead the plane of immanence is something that is characterized by infinite speed. So the idea is that if you've got immanence going, this is where all these things connect, although you're going to have elements that are not necessarily immanent. They're not really characterized as immanent. So you have these transcendent kind of effects going on that they describe as projections on the plane of immanence, figures of transcendence, but they still have these effects. But the difference is that you have some kind of real power of causation and a real ability to affect things, versus a kind of effect, which is this kind of impoverishment of this power to affect and be affected and whatnot. And the idea of Spinoza's ethics is this kind of idea of power, where power to affect and be affected. That's kind of what the idea is. But something that's transcendent will kind of block that off. And they describe this also in the same way with Nietzsche, talking about active and reactive forces. So a reactive force is what separates an active force from what it can do, from going to the limit of its power. So there's something similar like that with, active, reactive, also with immanent, transcendent, or something like power. Not so much in the way that, so in English, we just have, one word power, but in French, you have two words for power, and they're using the one that means more something like capacity, potentiality, whatnot. But so immanence is something that is desired on one level, but in this case, they'll give an analysis of something and talk about how it's immanent, but talking about how it just simply has power within a field of forces. And I think that's actually how they talk about the state, I believe, in capitalism. So okay, so it's latent in it appears suddenly. It's like, oh my God, the state, it's here. But that's when it is latent, and also it's operating on it has this transcendent effect that it's still operating with. So it's not kind of operating on this plane of immanence where you have all these forces kind of colliding with each other. Instead, it's operating through this kind of idea of an extra dimension that it kind of projects into these things. So it always has, kind of like a cross axis. It has some kind of effect, this transcendent thing, but it's not an effect in the same way that it's kind of, I'll say, like represented to be. So the state, when you reach capitalism, it becomes just another force among forces. And they're saying that's it when it becomes concrete. That's when it becomes immanent, because the plane of immanence for capitalism, the consistency where all these things kind of connect together, is that field of forces, and the state then is just one force among others. Just one flow among others. Another, break flow, a skits, a fluxion. That's a great word, by the way, fluxion. I love that word. So that, I don't, it's almost, to give that a kind of ethical evaluation is almost kind of nonsensical, in the sense that it's almost like asking, like, would you prefer there to be capitalism? Deleuze and Guattari, would you prefer that? I think they would say, like, well, the fuck are you talking about? There is capitalism. I don't like that. It's a meaningless question almost. Instead, ethics isn't something you can do as like a form of history necessarily. It's more something that has to be, it's actually specific to the immanent criteria of life. So it's something that whatever is evaluating the ethics, it can only evaluate itself. This is actually something that they also get from Nietzsche too. The gay science, where he says, yeah, I've got all these ideas. I have this conscious, like, oh, I've got this grand idea of value with a capital V. I'm going to apply it to all these other people. And he's just like, no, how about instead, if you're going to evaluate anything, evaluate what is, like, believes that it's valuing. That's an immanent criteria. It's self-referential, which is also what a concept is for Deleuze and Guattari. So yeah, I think that's what's going on with the ethics, and why, yeah, immanence, don't automatically think that it means good, because in some cases it just simply means that it's operating on a certain consistency with other forces on one plane, but guess what? There's multiple planes of immanence because it's Deleuze and Guattari. So there you go.
That I feel like that's kind of helpful, at least in my head. I'm thinking about it, but is that to say that it is like relative? Like,
No.
can something be transcendent on a different field, but then like immanent to other forces?
Oh, yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, okay, the state, I think, is a perfect example of that because you got, yeah, that same thing going
And does
with,
that apply to, I guess, the question I asked in the chat of like when they're talking about the capitalist machine in the next section, they keep using this like social immanence, field of social immanence. Is that apply to like this state field and all this stuff that I don't understand at all?
yeah. Yeah, so, okay, the capitalist field of social immanence. So that's where, you've got social production going on, which they've been talking about, since the beginning. And that is where, so capitalism is what makes that concrete, but it's just the next socius, it replaces the other two. But that's what makes things immanent. But then the state becomes concrete in the capitalist social immanence, that plane of immanence, but it becomes concrete in that as just like I was saying, like just one force in a field of forces. So that would be, so yeah, there's some kind of an immanent kind of cross section going on there. But I think the thing is, yeah, they're still thinking that back then you've got something that's transcendent operating with another social field that has its own kind of immanence, like everything does, but that's going to be something different. And I think that's kind of what they're getting at with this. Yeah, there's a kind of latency, and then you've got the concrete. It's just kind of the difference between how the state operates in the despotic machine versus the capitalist machine. Okay, yeah, the Urstaat thing though. Yeah, they don't really. This is like the shortest chapter I think they have, and they don't really give much. I mean, they kind of explain their idea, but they don't really explain kind of why they're, there's no kind of like historical anthropological evidence really given to it. So I'll grant Eric, I think that's true. In a way, they're kind of, I think this kind of, I mean, this happens a lot, but they're kind of saying, yeah, what if? Just humor me and think about this and see how it kind of goes along with these other aspects, even though, yeah, it's not gonna, maybe it doesn't follow in a kind of propositional kind of manner, but in 1,000 Plateaus, they write a lot about the Urstaat and about the appearance of the state and nomads and all this stuff. Really, there's like hundreds of pages on it. But I'll try to summarize for y'all because I'm a nice guy, kind of. Okay, so one thing that they're getting a lot of this from is from this one, a political anthropologist named Pierre Clastres. Oh, I can't say his name. See if you can see this. Clastres. Yeah, I think that's how you anglicize it. Now you can't see that. I will type it in because I think that's important. So he wrote something. So this book I have, it's called Society Against the State, but it's just a collection of essays. So this guy was friends with Deleuze, maybe in Guattari too, I guess. They're all friends probably. And his thing is that, okay, we think of, these non-state societies, or it was common for political anthropologists to describe them as not having a state, not having political power. And he talks about how it's interesting that these societies are always described in the negative. They're always lacking something, a state or power or something, or surplus, or it's something. And he's thinking like, okay, how do we actually kind of positively think of these societies? And what he shows is that it's not some kind of simple, pure lack of a state that is going on with these societies. Instead, they actually have these sophisticated mechanisms kind of built into them to ward off the arising of a state. So they already presuppose a state in their organization, these non-state societies. And that's part of why they give this kind of argument that they presuppose each other, both the non-state society with its warding off mechanisms. And that's going to be connected from also with kind of like these nomadic people that kind of circulate. But then also you're going to have these more sedentary people. And that's going to be also connected with kind of like a proper tribal society that's more sedentary. And they're always kind of circulating in this spectrum, between these poles of being sedentary and nomadic. But then you're going to have conflicts within that. And that, I believe, is where they're going to say that that's where the state kind of appears, but it appears kind of like what Nev was talking about with Nietzsche. It appears from the outside as another people kind of conquering those people, that society. So it's something different. And that's why it appears suddenly, but so in one sense, it's kind of they're all operating within the same milieu, in this spectrum of kind of thinking of the nomadic, sedentary warfare that's going on, all of it. But when it actually is able to kind of take over and really kind of reorganize things enough where it really kind of sets a kind of fixed establishment of, we are the conquerors, you are the conquered. That's where you first get the state. But that's always what the non-state society was avoiding, because you've constantly got this back and forth going. And that actually is what explains the whole structure of the non-state societies. But also you've got these presuppositions within the state societies, of course, too. So that's why he believed that they had to appear at the same time. And also this idea that you can't have just some kind of sudden evolution internally, that it is instead something that has to be coming from this outside perspective. Or it's not even perspective, it is from the outside, these different people. Even though so there's no kind of like great evolutionary shift from the people that will invade the other people. The big shift is for the kind of conjunction of those two. That's when you get the state. Even though the conquering people, who are going to be these nomadic people, at least in Deleuze and Guattari's idea, those are going to be not totally different from the sedentary people that have these kind of tribal mechanisms where there is no kind of grand chief that operates like a king or whatnot. That presupposes a state. I feel like I'm just repeating myself endlessly now. I probably am. Stuck in a time loop. But what was the other thing? There's something else.
We got to push reset on Chase. Feed him new terms.
Yeah, okay, but there's, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna ask about I'm like trying to look for points of entrance to the capitalist machine section because and like I said, I just feel like I don't have a reference for that language.
I can propose a point of entrance if you'd like one.
Go for it. Yes.
Oh my God. No, I'm just, hey, okay. So like, just to, okay. So we're talking about state. We're talking about right now we're talking about these, like this analysis of the emergence of the state and its relationship to basically, at least what I've been hearing from Chase just prior, was its relationship to, I mean, even though you didn't directly kind of quote this, but it's like back to that quote from Nietzsche about those blonde-haired invaders or whatever, those guys. So, okay. There's this move in that the blonde beasts, there's this move made by blonde beast life. And you know, when I read that, this is just an aside, but when I read about the blonde beast thing, I immediately was like, whoa, I get how they could get confused, you know, how they were, you know, back in the 1920s and 30s. Reading, you know, a lot of German citizens reading Nietzsche being like, oh, blonde, oh, I get it, sure. But I don't know, I had like an aha moment there, but I get it's not literally like blonde humans. It's not, like, very clearly, you know, you think, yeah, but yeah, like, sure, yes. So, okay, and yeah, Nevitt's got, yes, good examples of what I'm talking about. Okay. So these conquerors, like, yeah, like the king of the jungle, the lions, these sort of, these forces come in, and although in other states, you know, like in Roman feudalistic societies or whatever, there were these apparatuses like that were imposed by forces on high, blonde beasts, you know. Why didn't it produce capital? And why are we so interested in capital? Well, part of why we're so interested in capital is because there is capital, and we need to talk about what is there, and it is there, and let's talk about it, right? So how did we get here? Okay, well, yeah, Nietzsche is always literal. So the conditions were there. Why didn't it emerge? Okay, then they ask a really cool question, which is why England and not China? Well, okay, is it because of the decoded flows? Well, decoded flows are kind of everywhere. Well, and then their answer is, well, capital has something special to it, or a lot of things are special to it. And one of those things, one of those key features, is that it works through what they call a generalized decoding. A generalized decoding and a universal conjunction. A universal conjunction under the phrase something like all is production. There's this kind of similar to the way that the Enlightenment puts us in a world where everything is matter. You know what I'm saying? Everything is matter. You know, you ask a scientist, what's inside of an atom? A proton and neutrons and whatever. And you say, okay, what's inside of those? Oh, those are called up quarks and down quarks. Okay, what's inside of those? This thing called a Planck length. Okay, what's inside of a Planck length? They say, I don't fucking know. Matter. So I don't know what it is, but I know that it's matter. Okay, you know. Okay, so and this, I mean, that's an old example that Hegelians like. Yo, it's all a flow. Yeah, that's an old example Hegelians like to use to talk about matter and formalism, but it works here to say, okay, matter is a term that we use to say all is matter. All is, sure, like Chase is saying, all is slime. But all is matter. Well, in capital, all is production. So what is this conjunction that we're operating in? How did it get here? So there's this conjunction that makes capital into what is the new full social body, rather than, let's say, the Roman denarii, or the, you know, whatever the system of money was, or whatever feudal coins, doubloons, whatever, francs, these whatever monetary, you know, units of currency. What changed when it became capital? Right, you know, and I mean, Marx is obsessed with this question. So they're talking about, okay, it's this general equivalent that becomes filiative, becoming the quasi-cause. It's this filiative general equivalent that becomes the quasi-cause of things, where it takes up the place of this all is production thing. All is quasi-caused by my frickin' money that I'm spending to make you produce stuff, you know? What it's kind of like people make fun of this idea. Like they're obviously not assenting to this idea really like that. Well, I mean, that's why they say quasi-cause. They're saying quasi-cause because it's just the quasi-cause. It's not the real cause. But capitalists would say, yeah, if there wasn't like a contemporary, like post-1600 style of economy, why would anything ever change ever? You know, why do I have any reason to? And then people make jokes about like, yeah, you remember when the first caveman ever sharpened a rock into a point and he said, I wonder how I could use this to produce a profit incentive. Like there's plenty of, so they're pointing out it's a quasi-cause. So capital transform, this is the part that I wanted to, I think we're gonna have to spend some more time on later in a second, but after I get through my bitching, they talk about surplus value of codes being kind of formatted into these surplus value of flux, surplus value of code to surplus value of flux. And that is totally mystical to me. I am lost. I'm dazed and confused when they say that, but I have an attempt. I have a pretend attempt at understanding it. So they say, okay, this is where they talk about the exchange money and the credit money, managed money and financed money, like what Eric was talking about, this hard line distinction. Managed money, financed money, state giving it a principle of convertibility, ensuring the desire of the poorest. So we've shored up a lot of things. We've got blonde beasts in charge. What do those blonde beasts do? They have control over this currency, this stuff, this denarii, this minted stuff. Okay, what do we do with that minted stuff? Let's make it filiative so it becomes a quasi-cause. Boom, okay. Now the blonde beasts are in charge of this stuff, and this stuff is the quasi-cause. Okay, boom, there we go. Now, how do we make poor people want this stuff? Let's give it a principle of convertibility. Okay, so we're covering a lot of bases for establishing a complete conjunction, a universal conjunction, where they're touching on a lot of bases, shoring up a lot of loose ends on establishing a universal conjunction where all is production, right? Then they keep talking about the mechanics. Okay, the bank is a place where it's a center for control of capital and desire. Marxism has to confront desire. This is on page like 232 and 231 and stuff. They're talking about, oh yeah, Marxism as a philosophy needs to kind of confront the topic of desire, because Marx is very kind of caught in these, not caught, but he's very preoccupied, at least in a lot of his writing, with the functional and logical and financial, economic, mathematical operations of capital, the mode of domination that capital incurs on its subjects, you know, et cetera, how capital goes through the motion of turning proletariats or subjects or citizens into appendages of the capitalist arm and leg and limb. You're talking about that, but they're saying, okay, we need to confront desire. Well, and then they talk about the, you know, relative limits or whatever. They're talking about why capital seems so plastic, so flexible. But then here's where, so they're still just getting through these different mechanics, trying to go through their own kind of mini critique of political economy, like recap kind of thing, this crash course, this Deleuzian crash course on a critique of political economy. But here's the part where things get weird for me. And it's page 233 and 232. But yes. Yes. Okay. On page 232 and 233. The second paragraph of 232 and the second paragraph of 233. We've got some weird stuff we're going to have to confront here. They say, here's what I basically read them as saying in these pages. How do machines, they raise a basic question that a lot of like people who are skeptical of Marxism, I've heard this question before. They're basically saying, they're putting on the floor, they're saying, here's a question that a guy who doesn't know anything about any of this stuff, what he would ask. A guy who doesn't know anything about Marx and is skeptical of Marx would say, well, hold on a second, Mr. Marx man. How come you tell me two things at once that seem weird? Well, on one hand, these machines that the capitalist is buying with his money, by the way, continue to advance. They continue to advance. They continue to take over the work. They continue to make it easier for you, the laborer. And yet, you continue to argue that exploitation supposedly continues at the same rate, even though the work is definitively being overtaken by machines. How does that possibly make sense, right? And so Deleuze and Guattari are like, well, okay, well, let's give our answer. And their answer is, it cannot be understood without reference. And this is on page 232. They say it seems to us with the same indispensable incompetence, which I thought was really funny. They say it seems to us with the same indispensable incompetence, which is just a total like "fuck me, I suck" kind of sentence starter. They say with that same indispensable incompetence that these problems can only be viewed under the conditions of the transformation of the surplus value of code into a surplus value of flux. Okay, that's what they're saying. It cannot be understood without being viewed under the conditions of the transformation of the surplus value of code into the surplus value of flux. That's their basic premise. So in this transformation of the surplus value of code to the surplus value of flux, there is a holding of one great capitalist machine under one true axiomatic of the social machine. And I'm pretty sure, based on the stuff from a few pages ago, that one true axiomatic, right, is that all is production, all is productive, or whatever. Sure. Well, then they get into anti-production and stuff. But here's my thing. When they say that this question, how do machines continue to advance and take over the work, but exploitation supposedly continues? Well, our answer is that there's a move from surplus code to surplus flux, surplus value of code to surplus value of flux. And there's this one great capital. It's not necessarily a series of machines or whatever, but it's one great capitalist machine under one true axiom, buddy, you know, and that kind of complicates your picture of the easing of labor, because the labor isn't necessarily being eased, it's being intensified under the one great capitalist machine. That's a tentative answer I can basically understand, right? But as far as I understand, Marx is saying, when I read Capital, many hundreds of years ago, when I read Capital for a close reading for a semester with a professor of mine, so which makes me an expert on it, by the way. I read it one time for school and I wrote a whole paper on it. So trust me, I know a lot about it. I feel like his answer, and I'm just opening this to the room and tell me, does this sound like what they're saying? Or does this conflict with what they're saying? I don't know. I really just don't even know. He would say, if you ask Marx, hey, Carl, why is it that machines keep getting bigger, but you keep bitching about exploitation? You know, you keep saying you're exploited, but your work keeps getting easier because all these more and more intense machines, right? Yes. So Nevin, I'm with you about the codes thing. So I'm going to ask that question in a second. I don't really get how the value thing, and I'm trying to get at that. Marx would say his more kind of practical, you know, hitting a big girder with a hammer kind of answer to the question, like practical, pragmatic, like he's an economist. His kind of answer would be, I know why machines are getting better, but we're getting further exploited. It's because of relative surplus value. You know, he would say that's the key term, relative surplus value. Because if I'm a boss man at a factory, to put this in simple terms, if I'm a boss of a factory and I'm exploiting my workers real good, and I'm making a lot of surplus value off of them, I'm extracting a lot of surplus value off of their labor, and then suddenly some device is created which makes it so that they can do twice the amount of work in the same amount of time. I'm not going to cut their hours. That's never going to happen. But I am going to make them use these new machines to get more product, right? So I can get more money. Okay, great, right? So I can extract even more surplus value if I pay them the same. Okay. The problem comes in when the other guy, let's say Chase or Eric or Nevin or something, is another, you know, we're 1830s English industrialists, you know, and I've got a match factory, and Chase has got a wool coat factory, and he's spinning yards of linen into wool coats, whatever. Or maybe, no, we're in the same industry. Actually, I'd make it easier. If we're both in the same industry, some technological advancement, a machine gets better, and so I need to keep up at the highest possible rate of exploitation with these machines, right, to get the biggest bang for my buck. That's just because I'm greedy or whatever, right? But then Chase comes along and says, hey, I saw this new fancy ding-dong thing you got, this big matchmaker, this whatever, this big machine that's so efficient. I'm going to use that too. And when I use it, I am going to have just the same advantage as you do. And now you basically have no advantage anymore because I have the same thing you do. You no longer have an advantage because Marx's basic definition of surplus value is a social value, a social mechanism, a means for the appropriation of social power. That's the point. For Marx, surplus value is a means. Marx, like of Marx, like this is Marx. This is not a Marxist or anything. This is what I got from Marx himself. Surplus value is a means for the acquisition of social power, of social domination, of power, of establishment of power. And in doing so, I can't deal if my neighbor has the same shit I do. Not only do I need to squeeze everything I can out of my employees, I need to squeeze harder than my competitors. I need to be better than my competitors. The other capitalist bosses who are also squeezing their laborers, I need to do it harder and faster and better than them. I need to exploit my laborers harder. Okay, sure. I get the idea. Let's say I'm a libertine, lily liver, and I'm especially sympathetic to my laborers, and I say, oh, you know what, you guys, you've been working so hard, we're making matches. This big machine, you can do all the work you did in 8 hours in only 4, so just stay for 4. And then I find out Chase, that, guy who's out to ruin my life, is running the same machine with the same amount of employees for 8 hours a day. And now I am fucked. I am fucked completely. I'm out of the money. I'm out of the running. I'm completely done. So that is why, to me, that's a big motivating. That's called relative surplus value, is how much do you have relative to the other guys who have surplus value being extracted into their pocket. Surplus value is not just from the laborers, it's in comparison to the other capitalists, the other members of the warring band of brothers. You know what I'm saying? So why is it that machines keep advancing, but we keep wringing the employee out as hard as we possibly can for every penny that they can drop? Or I turn them up by their ankles and I shake them loose for any change in their pockets. Why do I keep doing that? Because I have to. Because if I ease up for a second, I know that Chase, or whatever hypothetical other capitalist, he's going to ruin my life. He's going to destroy my business, ruin my life, and put me under because I did not exploit as hard as physically possible, which means that as technology advances, it necessarily includes the advancement of exploitation or the intensification of exploitation because I can exploit you more because you're making more matches for me per minute. So that is Marx's answer, is relative surplus value obligates capitalists into this system, basically. Is that anything like what I don't know. Is that because when I look at what they're saying it's the transformation of surplus value of code into the surplus value of flux. And I just do not see how those two gel. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't see how they conflict either. Don't worry. I just don't get it. And I'm with Nevitt here. I feel like I'm missing key elements of this whole value of code, value of flux thing. That's my thing, basically. Okay, now I'm done.
Yeah, I'm wondering that too. Just like, what is the flux idea? I mean, my spitball, are they referring to just kind of like unnecessary needs and services and goods, whereas codes maybe seem a little bit more relevant to people's needs?
Is the codes have to do with kind of concrete qualities, usually more so. So the surplus value of code, which I felt like that was something I wanted to almost look back and reread the sections where they specifically talk about that, is you kind of have to keep that in mind while you're reading this in order to have it make sense at all. I don't have time to do that, who has time to do that? But if I remember correctly, the surplus value of code, that's going to be what is kind of that's the dominant form of surplus value in the primitive territorial machine. And the example that I remember from that is, okay, because of kind of long, complex, I'll skip the explanation, but in filiation, they feel that usually the uncle will be kind of has the right, usually to something like a niece or something like that, and that by marrying them out to another family through this alliance, that's a gift. So this has to do with the whole kind of gift economy thing of, you know, creditor debtor, this whole like exchange, but doesn't want to use those words so much. But so that is where, okay, if I give away whatever, my daughter, my niece, someone in this marriage, I'm going to get some kind of surplus value for that by the fact that there's kind of a credit that I've created through that. You know, I've basically have loaned something in a sense that someone has to pay back with interest. But it has to do with something more concrete in this case. Well, a person, kind of concrete, but so the coding, though, I think what distinguishes the coding is that those have to do with these selections. So you've got, you know, the whole flow thing going on, but the code is you have to distinguish something within it, and also so it's kind of a selection, but also it's saying other parts don't get through. That's what the code means. That's how you code a flow, is you got this flow and you say this can go through, this cannot, you know, and that's how the coding works. But then to have a surplus value of that, I think, is to be able to say, like, that's creating a kind of imbalance, but in my favor, where now the flows need to come my way in some sense like that. I don't know. It's my best attempt to explain that, but that, you know, but why is that totally okay? But then you got decoding, which that is something where, I mean, you kind of think of that as, wait, what was the real, okay, the surplus value of flux? That was the question mainly, right? Is that one, okay?
I think there were two, like the value and surplus value of coding, and then also a flux, because he's comparing the two.
Oh yeah. Okay, so the surplus value of code, I'll admit I did not really understand that. That was the thing about the surplus value of, so it's like, that's the machinic surplus value, where I think the idea is that you have some kind of like intellectual labor that's done with selective innovation, with automating technology and whatnot, science and technology, and that will lower production costs, and you get surplus value through that. And I think that's what they say is machinic surplus value, but it works through these codes in this, in a more kind of the way that we would talk about codes now, like genetic codes and whatnot, or computers, shit like that. I think they mean something like that more so when they're talking about this surplus value of codes for these technical machines, because they're technical machines. And they, so one thing I remember is they say that these technical machines, they have this tendency to internalize these codes as they become more automated, which that makes more sense. You know, you've got automation, it's because it has some kind of a code like built into it, telling it what to do. Which how do you get that? How do you do that? Through this kind of intellectual labor, which has to do with this whole kind of flow of knowledge that they're talking about, this flux of knowledge and intellectual labor that kind of captures science and simultaneously makes it stupid. And first of all, I love the idea of the surplus value of stupidity. I think they talk about that goes along with knowledge. That is amazing. I definitely agree with that. Because I think the idea is that's actually kind of, it's the deterritorialization and reterritorialization, how they kind of go along with each other, where the stupidity is the reterritorialization. I would always just come back to this kind of limiting factor of, well, in this case, it has to fit with, raising the profit levels for the whole firm, lowering production cost, all, yada, yada, capitalism kind of stuff. But in order to kind of go along with that, because that's a rather limiting axiom, a rather limiting force, that is what makes it stupid and makes it cater to something that's going on. Well, the whole anti-production kind of thing going. Okay, anyways, I'm getting distracted. All right, so the surplus value of code has to do with that scientific, technical kind of way of taking these selections and saying, okay, these are the ones that actually deserve innovation. These are the ones we're going to develop and turn into these machines that lower production costs. And then, yay, with surplus value, awesome. And then there's the just kind of regular human surplus value, which Hunter just talked about that. It's where like, okay, gonna exploit. That's based for that one. I think it's basically like, yeah, maybe you can like train people or something, like some kind of Foucauldian like disciplinarian or like Taylorism, like Fordism, something like that. But yeah, it's like exploitation based. I think that's really how you're gonna probably get human surplus value. Machines are coded only in pre-capitalist. Wait, no, I don't think so. No. So I think there's decoding also going on in the pre-capitalist, but then machines are still coded. But okay, so capitalism, okay, the decoding that happens there, I think, is not a kind of absolute thing, because that what the state does is it recodes. So yeah, so decoding, which is okay, coding, that's kind of saying, selecting things, saying, got a flow, whatever, wheat or something, and I'm saying this wheat can go there, it can't go there, got a flow of women, I'm like, they can go to this guy, but not to that guy. So that's going to be coding, okay? But then guess what? You have like United Fruit Company, like blazes in with like F-16s or something, and it's just like, you will accept Walmart, and yeah, and then that's going to cause some decoding.
Okay, so I was just looking at the page 232 to 233 and trying to put together the coding stuff. And yeah, I'm seeing like they say coded, over-coded in pre-capitalist societies in such a way that they never achieve any independence. And so, yeah, like, and the decoding of flows in capitalism has freed, deterritorialized, decoded the flows of code, just as it has the others, to such a degree that the automatic machine has always increasingly internalized them in its body or its structure as a field. So I was trying to put together those sentences. But
yes, that's that machinic, the one where they're internalizing it through in their body or whatever. I remember writing that down.
Yeah, oh yeah, I remember reading that. Well,
Oh, here it is. Yeah.
is it like I was thinking like I'm trying to put together what Hunter was saying about the relative surplus value. How is that internalization and this allowance of independence or freeing some idea of like surplus values kind of breaking itself off of any sort of grounding and becoming relative? And I guess I was like playing with that idea that you mentioned earlier, Chase, about like different fields and the kind of quasi-cause field becomes its own field of immanence, and surplus value kind of gets like stuck up there, and it kind of takes on that relative flux surplus value. I guess like that's kind of what's going through my head right now.
Yeah, I think so. I do think you're confusing so it is, I think, still relative surplus value that is going on with this machinic surplus value, the automatic machine, increasingly internalized code and its body or structure as a field of forces. So that is going to be the machinic surplus value, which is going to be a little different from the variable or human surplus value that is the relative surplus value that Hunter was talking about. So, and I think the difference between those and the way that I know that they say that the machinic surplus value, it presupposes the human surplus value because that's what it needs, the whole the human labor that's like the intellectual labor of science and technology that they talk about. So that's where that flow comes in, where they're talking about knowledge and stupidity flows. And I think that's a pretty big part of what they're talking about in terms of this is how you get. So I think one thing they're kind of saying is that all this value stuff, it's all surplus value. It presupposes surplus value inherently in it, and it also reproduces itself as a mechanism of surplus value. And that's the only way it really works. And that's why you can't even really, not only because there's kind of different surplus values always relating to each other, and so they can't be independently calculated, but also the fact that you don't have some kind of just value sitting on its own that you can kind of distinguish really from surplus value, because they all presuppose those in terms of the field of forces and whatnot. So that's the whole thing, kind of the differential relation. So, God damn it, yeah, it's it's actually not really that complicated when you kind of learn it, which I'm not saying I really totally
what Hunter was
grasp it.
talking about, right? The differential relation is what Hunter was talking about.
No. Well,
I'm like looking at page 237 when they give those three aspects of the social immanence, and they kind of say the one that extracts human surplus value on the basis of the differential relation between decoded flows of labor and production.
Yeah, so the decoded flows of labor, that's going to be, okay. Oh wait, extracts human surplus value on the basis of the differential relation between decoded flows of labor and production. Okay, so human surplus value, yeah, that's what Hunter was talking about. And the difference between labor and production, so that's where, yeah, I've got my labor, I whatever, build some TVs or whatever, but then I make more, I make enough where the company can sell them and they make more money than they paid me. That's surplus value right there. Why is it decoded? Well, that's kind of relative to these older circuits. At least I kind of see it that way. And where, okay, if I come in to some like third world country and start like, okay, congratulations, you get capitalism, you get a iPhone factory, good job, we're emancipated. That's going to cause decoded flows of labor. It's going to shake things up. Well, okay, I think one actually kind of like concrete thing. I don't know. I feel like I'm in a very kind of like silly mood today. It's kind of hard to focus, but I'll try. I'm going to try to right now. It's getting serious right now. Okay, so I was watching this video, and it was talking about these farmers, like land grazing. They had cattle in Botswana, and there was a law that favored kind of industry cattle producing, and this caused the small herders of these cattle to have to kind of move to the city in order to get these jobs because of these commercial cattle farms, and they suddenly start working on this level. Okay, that I think is a way of very much decoding that flow of labor and how that's, and they're saying, yeah, that of course has to do with, it's motivated by this surplus value, this kind of disequilibrium in it, where the flows are being adjusted to maximize that, which is kind of the same thing, this in the principle of a disequilibrium and a kind of exchange and these flows as the primitive territorial thing. But in this case, the thing is that it's decoded rather than coded. But yeah, that's where you get this human surplus value and the basis of the differential relation between decoded flows of labor and production. So yeah, the differential relation there, I think that's really kind of, it's just the relation in a way, but that is what Hunter was talking about. Although what's important for them is that the differential relation, the different variables for it, you got your equation, and you got one thing on top here, one thing on the bottom. You can't have just these numbers and they could separate and that they have these values for themselves. That doesn't make any sense. They only work together. So they only have a determinate value with that. And the fact that they can't be separated, that's going to be the big thing. And they're going to say, this is why there's no limit to these things. And it always presupposes a kind of surplus value, is because it always has a difference kind of embedded in it. And that's what keeps it flowing. And that's why the surplus value is kind of just inherent within it. Because that's, that difference within one variable and then the difference within another, and the way that those two differences are kind of combined together, that's going to be your differential relation. And that's kind of, that's a big thing going for them. And that's to do with the whole, it eventually adds up to the whole kind of limit thing that they're getting at, and how capitalism, it has no external limit, but it has these internal limits that it continuously displaces, which I would have to see, like, I have to like switch over to like one frame in order to understand it. If I switch like too quickly, then I'll be like, wait, what the fuck does that mean? Like, what does the limit mean? And I have to like readjust in order to get that to mean something. And by then, if there's some other problem, then I have to like switch over to this and think about it. It's just, I feel the vertigo of schizophrenia. I'm not sure if this is exactly what they're going for or not, but at least that's what I feel. Yeah. Capitalism's awesome. I just realized that.
So, do we have any takeaways from today, guys.
This stuff is hard.
So it gets harder in the next section.
As Nietzsche says, we haven't seen anything yet.
I'm
Yeah.
definitely taking away Spinoza's Jesus. That's what I got.
I'm taking away two things. One, imminence is not always good. Imminent is not always good. It's just a descriptor.
Hunter, you brought that.
Yeah, yeah, you know. And then I have other shit. The other stuff I was about to say I took away was also shit that I brought. You know, it's like I'm at a potluck and I'm packing up leftovers of the stuff I brought because it's mine, like mashed potatoes and bean casserole. Like it's mine. I made it and nobody ate it. So what? You know, like I have, you know, and I know that Deleuze and Guattari, they throw around the word ideology like they own the place, and we're not, and we're just gonna. And I was like all about it because they like that's one of the last few words of this section. We didn't even talk about that. I was all about, okay, they're talking about the commodity form, they're talking about ideology, and I was all I was passionate about something once, you know what I mean? Like whatever. But now here I am. I'm just that's
Wait,
I'm
hold on,
happy.
Hunter. What do you think of so they call capitalism, it's not the age of cruelty anymore. It's not the age of terror. It's the age of cynicism. I was thinking that sounds like something Hunter would say. I don't know.
I mean, it's cynicism. But here's the thing, though, right? Is that they would say that cynicism is identifiable as a result of is identifiable as a result of a set of flows or something. My thing is that I think that that I don't mean to be dismissive. But my thing is that I think that I mean, yeah, first off, yeah, Eric is totally right. Like Sloterdijk talks about the cynicism thing, but like for me, I have a video about this I can link in the Discord if anybody's, but like cynicism is a to me a consequence of ideology. Is a consequence of ideology. Ideology is something that has you. Right, it has you in its clutches, you know. And the ironic distantiation, the cynicism, the living in a barrel, the beautiful loser, which is the title of a book by Leonard Cohen, who is usually brilliant. It all feels to me just you ever seen MASH? Feels kind of like MASH. Feels kind of like fuck yeah, dude, right? Like one of the sickest shows like ever. Like, but my dad used to watch it all the time. The whole point of MASH is like, oh, isn't it so funny? These guys in the Korean War are all ironic and silly. But then at the same time, it's like they're really good. They're really good American soldier doctors. They're very, very good military medics. And then you look at Full Metal Jacket and you see what's his nuts blowing his stuff out on the toilet, you know, just shooting his brains out and killing his commanding officer and having a total flip out because he got too close. He got too in it. It was too real, you know. This is what Hegel was talking about. Look, the madman is the one who takes the rules of convention too seriously and starts bringing them out. And this is what Hegel or Zizek says, that basically that's a paranoiac. A paranoiac is a person who everything that society tells them, he takes seriously. And he's like, oh, okay, that's serious. And then he looks around and notices that nobody is listening to any of the things he was just told by the omnipotent voice on high. And then he has a total flip out. Or he feels persecuted because they're very persecuting. I never saw the end of MASH, but I want to kind of but I like the intro. My point is ideology, cynicism. They call it the age of cynicism. Well, I agree, but I'm saying the cynicism to me is an affect of an ideological constellation, an ideological formation of flows, a roadmap laid out for the dissemination of flow produced by, I mean, what is it? ISAs, internet ideological state apparatuses, and so on and so on. So the cynicism is definitely there. It's just a logical position, or not a logical, but a reasonable position to take in the face of the horror, and saying, I'm cynical, I'm moronically detached, I'm like a MASH guy. I'm like a MASH soldier who's all, I can put up with being a cog in the American military industrial complex and basically putting all of my mind and body and soul into the effort of killing as many Koreans as possible in an unjust war and saving as many American hands who are going to be holding as many guns to kill as many Koreans as I can possibly do. Of course, that's assumed. But I'm not going to be fucking pleased about it. And while I do it, I'm going to make some jokes. I'm going to say, hey, how's your wife? How's your sister? Fuck your mother, because I'm above it all, because I'm smart. I'm not like one of those stupid pig GIs. I'm too smart. But in the end, they're still just doing it. They're just doing the thing, I just think that it's kind of like why I think Camus is kind of outdated in a sense, a lot of Camus. And I don't mean to say this dismissively, but I think a lot of Camus' advice is outdated. I think when he says everybody should, look, the thing is, you should imagine Sisyphus happy and yourself as Sisyphus. Everybody is already Sisyphus and is already quite happy. You know what I mean? Is already imagining Sisyphus happy, I feel. I think it's we're at a different period here. We're at a different time. We're at a place where that sort of cynicism, that sort of irony, that sort of detachment, that sort of personal levity or whatever, imagining yourself happy even in the face of the absolute terror or whatever, the absurdity of reality and the fact that I am a part of this grand machine that eats me and spits me out. Yeah, it's definitely there, but I locate it within a framework in view of an ideological apparatus that kind of determines the formation of flows. So I don't think that, I mean, I guess, capitalism is an age of cynicism in a sense. But I mean, I think that, be that as it may, I would love to say, oh my God, Deleuze and Guattari are saying something I agree with, like Steve Harvey, like you and totally buy into it. But I know that they're saying it in a way that's different from how I'm saying it. You know what I mean? That's all. Anyway, yeah, that's what I'm thinking about the cynicism thing, and that's how I'm feeling about a lot. It's just I'm coming at it from a different. I think he has a different. I think I have a different understanding of the word ideology, and what ideology does, and how deep it runs, and how it is fabricated. I just think there's a difference between my interpretation of that and Deleuze and Guattari's interpretation. And so when they say capitalism is the age of cynicism, I think yeah, it is. But why do you say that? What is it that you say? And what kind of argument are you going to make by saying so? Are you going to say that we need to focus more on flows? Because I agree with the general attitude of pushing the decoding. Push, go further. Yes. But I don't think that their analysis is going to tend towards things like the destitution of the subject under the weight of the master signifier caught in the loop of desire. I don't think that they see subjectivity as caught in the pure repetition of desire. And I don't think that they see it as a predicament that cannot be solved without destitution. I don't think they think that. I don't think for me to say all that, they'd be like, this is a bunch of hoo-ha, this is a bunch of hibbity-jibbity. And if I said that to, somebody like Lacan Lacan would also call me an idiot, or he wouldn't understand it because he speaks French. Zizek at least would think I'm maybe somewhat reasonable because I'm mostly just repeating back what he said to him. So maybe he would like it. So that's it. Anyway, that's what I think about that.
My journal.
Like how everyone's a connoisseur of MASH, except me. I just remember when MASH would be on TV, that would mean that I'm up too late and I need to go to bed and I need to turn off the TV. That's all I remember.
When MASH is on the TV, that's when you need to be alive.
So you really think it's a good show? Because I've really never like paid attention to it. Yeah.
It's one of the best television programs ever made.
That was a bold claim.
Yeah.
With regard to the reading, my problem was more that it was just so packed and so dense. And if you guys can remember way back when, if any of you had geometry or maybe in logic or something, and you're reading a proof, and at every step you're like, yeah, I get that. And then you read the next step. Yeah, that follows from the next step. And then you read the next step. Yeah, I follow. And then you get to the end of the thing and you followed all along. But then at the end, you're like, I really don't understand what's going on. Because you can't hold the whole thing in your mind at one time. You can like get each step. And so when I'm reading the text, it's like, yeah, I understand that. And I understand that. And I understand that. And then I back up and I look at the paragraph. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. And so that's kind of the feeling I get. But I think it's just because it's so dense, and each step in their argument, is so packed with vocabulary and stuff. It's just hard to keep track of.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm able to get something at least out of it, and I can't follow every step. There's some where I'll be like, I don't get that, whatever. You just got to keep flowing past it. Hunter does have a cat. Is that a new cat? I thought Hunter was like an anti-cat person.
He got this cat when he moved in, or this cat adopted him, right? When he moved in with his new, and now the cat likes him, and Hunter's trying to figure out how to not kill the cat and maybe how to love it. I don't know.
Yeah, don't kill it. Yeah, surplus value. Okay, I have to say something about next week's reading. Is that what you're saying? It gets worse, at least for, I think it's the first, it's the first 5 pages. First 5 pages. Okay, I can tell this is written by Guattari. I can tell. It's talking about semiotics, and guess what? All the A signifying stuff, you're gonna get it here. And so they're talking about this. Well, they describe him in 1,000 Plateaus as the Danish Spinozist linguist. I don't know how to say his name, like Himsveld or something. It's this whole like content and expression, form and substance thing. But there's all this semiotic stuff that I don't know, reading it, I was just like, yeah, fuck this. And then they talk about Lyotard, which is a little more comprehensible, but it's kind of like, okay, it's Guattari just hates, the whole signifier thing. It's kind of a rant like that, but then it starts to get a little better, at least on the 6th page, where they start to talk about schizophrenia and capitalism, and they actually, I think, probably have the most kind of coherent explanation of the whole schizophrenia capitalism relation, and also the whole limit thing that's going on. But I'll say that first 5 pages and all the stuff with these semiotics, it's just oh god, it's just terrible. But if you read 1,000 Plateaus, they have this one plateau, the genealogy of the geology of morals, and it's supposed to like give you that effect of that vertigo of like, oh, I got all this stuff going on here in this succession. Well, what is going on here? What is going on? And it's really a pretty incredible work. This is something that I remember just reading it. I remember just being like, I cannot, like, simply, I can't do it. I just had to like tap out. I was just like, it's just like they endlessly give you these distinctions, and just it's just fractal, and they're doing it intentionally to like have you feel the vertigo of these things. Like, oh, you want your structure, you want your structuralism, here's your structure, here's a distinction, oh, here's a distinction, the distinction, the distinction, the distinction. And it's all framed within a lecture by this fictional professor, but then it turns into an H.P. Lovecraft narrative, where they're even just like directly quoting at the very end an H.P. Lovecraft story.
Hey, what is this that's like this?
This is a plateau of 1,000 plateaus, the geology of morals, which is insane. It's just like probably like the hardest thing I've ever read. I don't know. And it's a lot of it is the semiotics that they're going to talk about in this next section, this Himsveld guy or whatever his name is. But yeah. Oh God. So I have to try to learn that in order to help explain this God, yeah, God help us, is, yeah, I don't know. And this whole stuff with like Marshall McLuhan, yeah, he was awesome. But anyways, oh God, aren't I? I'm the goddamn explainer.
I had that solemn duty for a few months. I understand. I mean, when somebody's asking you like, what does he mean by objective spirit? What's the difference between that and fucking, and I'm here like, oh, fuck me, Jesus.
Okay, see, you at least know how I feel then, Hunter. Yeah, and I know how you feel now. Yeah.
Sometimes I would read through the reading during the Hegel thing, and I would read a sentence where I was like, I hope nobody asks anything about that. I hope nobody brings that up, because if they do, the whole facade is over. This whole thing is gonna collapse. I can't keep this up.
Now you know what it's like to be a professor in a class, because that happens. You read something like, oh God, I hope nobody asks about that, because I don't know what to say.
Yeah. God.
Yeah, so this next section, yeah, the first 5 pages, please don't ask me anything about it.
And actually, instead of asking you about the philosophy, it's currently time for, it's break time. It's break. Oh, boss man said it was break time. It's 9:13. I think I'm ready to hit the old dusty trail. How about you, fellas?
Break flow.
Yeah, I'm about to break this flow. How about you? All right, yeah. Thumbs up. Nighty night, everybody. I love you all. Bye. I'm going to end the meeting for all. I'm going to see what